Hey there, everybody. Eric Chessen, Autism Fitness founder, or let's go in reverse. Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training, where we take these strategies, concepts, and practices that we use to great success in autism fitness programming for the autism and neurodivergent population, and we break those down so they make sense and are more workable, usable, understandable, any of those three in any of those orders, so that you have take away pieces of information that can be utilized in your fitness and adapted PE programs. So this week I am excited because I've been asking for you to comment about some either technical or training or programming questions that you had, and lo and behold, I had one of my subscribers ask about circuit training for the autism population, and I love getting into programming because that secretly, or now not so secretly, is one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. How do you construct a program that is safe, effective, and meaningful for any individual? We know that the autism population is, of course, a spectrum, so there is a great range in physical, adaptive, and cognitive capabilities as they relate to exercise performance, and we want to take those all into account. So, before we get started, please definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone or someones who might get something or some things out of it. So let's talk about circuit training. Now, what is circuit training? Circuit training is when you have 3 or more exercises that are performed A, B, C, even D, if we're talking about 4 exercises, but for now, let's take 3. A, B, C, and then after a break, rest period, whatever you want to call it, the athlete goes back to exercise A. Circuit training has both advantages and disadvantages with respect to, going back to the PAC profile, physical, adaptive, and cognitive performance for each athlete. So we have to take that into account. So let's talk about some of the pros of circuit training, some of the reasons why we might implement it. Number 1 pro is that for groups or classes, circuit training is a fantastic choice in structuring your programs, because if I have 3 or more stations or exercises, I can have athletes performing one of those exercises at any given time, and there is no real bottleneck. A bottleneck is a big factor in the success and efficacy of a fitness or adapted PE program, because if you have an athlete waiting around, they might get anxious, they might get dysregulated, and just as importantly, they aren't doing something. If you only have 35 or 45 minutes a week to implement your adapted PE program, you want as much quality movement as much of the time as possible. So if we get into these longer waiting periods of 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes or even 3 minutes, all of a sudden that's taking a significant chunk out of that athlete or student's opportunity to participate, and it's taking away from something that they could be doing. So the more exercises there are within reason, the more the athlete can be doing at any one given time. So circuits or stations are a fantastic choice for groups of 3 or larger. The second pro or benefit to using circuit stations is that the exercise can be scalable. So let's say you have an athlete who is completely independent with their overhead sandbell presses, and you don't need to do anything but turn around and say, "Great sandbell presses, Tyler, that looks awesome," and they continue on. And then you have Lisa, and Lisa needs a little more guidance, a little more prompting for her overhead presses. Well, Tyler finished. Now it's Lisa's turn to do the overhead presses because she's at the overhead press station. So if you need to, you can provide a little bit more guidance for Lisa rather than Tyler, because he's more independent. Lisa needs a little bit more guidance. It's the same exercise, but that particular athlete needs more cueing in order to perform the exercise to the best of her ability. So because we're using an exercise that we can modify or progress, it allows us the opportunity to pinpoint that athlete at that exercise station and say, I am going to lean into this a little bit more because she needs more coaching than Tyler did. Great. Okay. The other advantage to circuits is that you can get more accomplished throughout that 35 or 45 minute, even 55 minute period, because you have an athlete who is going through 3 or 4 or 5 different movement patterns. So time being a factor, you can have more opportunities to perform that particular exercise. And if the session is going well, your athlete is going through 3 or 4 or even 5 times, so they're doing 5 sets of that particular exercise, enables them to get more practice, more hands-on, feet-on, body-on time with that exercise. So they're getting more volume. There's more accumulation. And the final pro for using circuits is you have social opportunities as well. So let's say we have our power circuit stations, and one of them is a medicine ball push throw. So we can have 2 athletes doing that medicine ball push throw, and it's scalable, so we can have them starting to step back and create more space between the throws, so they have to throw it harder, but both of them are capable of doing that. So it has the scalability factor, and it has that socialization factor as well. You can have 1 athlete at a station, you can have 2 athletes at a station, and the bonus pro that I just forgot about and then just remembered is the fact that when you have a group of students or athletes or student athletes on the autism spectrum, most of the time you're going to have differences, as is the case with neurotypical groups. You're going to have differences in physical, adaptive, and cognitive functioning. So if you have an athlete who needs to take a break, either physiologically or more often from the adaptive side, because doing too much at once is overwhelming for them, they can go off to the break area, take their 30 or 45-second or even a minute break. Meanwhile, nothing else suffers. The circuits are still there. The other athletes are still performing their exercises. So you can work towards the individual needs of each participating athlete. So that machine keeps going, even if an athlete needs to take that break and then come back in and start at the same exercise or a different exercise. You have the scalability in place to modify or progress it, and everybody else can keep participating. So it is not necessary to have the entire group participating at once for everybody to get something out of it, right? So those are all the pros of using circuits with your autism and neurodivergent athletes. Now, what are some of the cons? Some other con, the number one is physiological, training effect, right? Training effect for in autism fitness programming is a big deal because that is what we are doing here. We want to implement exercises in a meaningful way with appropriate intensity and volume so that the athlete gets stronger, moves better, is more stable, and generalizes those skills to the outside world wherever they may show up. The issue with circuits is sometimes if you're starting with a squat, for example, and then you go to a press, and then you go to a heavy carry or a sled push, it could be 2.5 or 3 minutes or even 4 before that athlete comes back to that first exercise, the squat. And the mind-muscle connection being what it is, if you're warming up for a squat and you do body weight and then you do a light external load and then you're working up towards, a kettlebell goblet squat or dumbbells or even a barbell, whatever we're talking about. Typically in our programming, we're talking about holding a sandbell or maybe holding a kettlebell, right? If that's the case, we usually want the athlete to stay with one exercise and at most do a superset, like an A and a B and then back to A, because we're going to lose some of the momentum or some of that physical priming when we go not only to exercise B, but then to exercise C. So we might lose a little bit of the of that physical and that neuromuscular dialing in, that readiness, if we have too many exercises going on. So for some of our more advanced athletes who are working with heavier weights, I would categorize most of the time anything over 15 or 20 pounds with our soft bells or dumbbells, any type of loading in the squat. Circuits may not be the best because the athlete also might fatigue during those second and third exercises. So after that squat, if they are then doing an overhead press, but then they're doing a heavy carry, there might be some systemic fatigue that is going to inhibit their performance in the squat. So that's definitely something to look out for. Then there's total volume as related to the exercise itself. If you have an exercise that you really need to focus on with a particular athlete, and then they're doing 3 or 4 more exercises in that session, and time ticks away, eventually you realize, oh, we only did 2 sets of this band row, whereas really I wanted to get 3 or 4. What starts to happen is the other exercises, because they're giving equal treatment here, then we can't give that extra time and practice to that focus exercise, the one that we really want to develop. So we might want to take that standing band row out of the circuit and say, first we're going to do 3 or 4 sets of this standing band row, and then we can go to a superset, or then we can go to a circuit as well. The other part on the physiological side is we have some athletes who will try to complete all of the exercises way too quickly, and we'll see that those mechanics, their body positioning and their performance is going to break down, because when you add speed, usually we're going to start seeing a decline in technique. And if we see that, then what's the point of the exercise if not for performing it with as good technique as is currently possible? So something to look out for. If you have an athlete who tends to go really quickly through, exercise 1, 2, 3, and 4, A, B, C, and D, and their whole goal for them is to finish everything as quickly as possible, you may want to consider not implementing that circuit program, but doing it more straight sets, which is, squat, set 1, 2, 3, 4, or supersets, squat, and then overhead press, and then squat and overhead press, and squat and overhead press, if that athlete has a tendency towards rushing through everything, because rushing through everything doesn't develop good technique. In fact, it actually does the opposite. So we want to avoid that as well. From an adaptive standpoint, sometimes we have an athlete who might get overwhelmed if there are too many exercises. So if we're giving instructions, we say, okay, first you're going to do squats, then you're going to do overhead press, then you're going to do heavy carry, then you're going to do band row. It might be a little much for that athlete also. So in order for them to be able to stay not only focused, but have as low anxiety as possible, we may want to introduce or program those exercises one at a time, or again, that superset, A and B. Final consideration for when circuits may not be the best choice is if you have an athlete who gets easily dysregulated or distracted. Now we have this transition time in between exercise A, so our overhead press, but then we're going to go over to this side of the gym or this side of the clinic to do standing band rows. And alongside that walk, or during that walk over, the athlete becomes dysregulated, or they become fixated on something else. And now we're turning what is a relatively easy transition, maybe it's 15 or 20 steps from one exercise to another, into a 2 or 3 minute segue into something else. All right. So if it begins to become a time trap, and now there are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes in between exercises, then circuits may not be the best choice, because we are losing all of this time in between exercises. So we may want to have the athlete be in just one place at one time, complete 3 or 4 or 5 sets of that initial exercise, and then move on to the next exercise. So not only do we have that physical benefit of the athlete performing those 3 or 4 or 5 sets in a row and priming the body for that movement, or those particular muscles for that movement, and having that readiness and having that focus, but we are also maximizing the time spent doing the exercise. So those are some of the considerations for not avoiding, but choosing other than circuits. So circuits can definitely be a benefit, particularly in groups or classes, for scalability, for socialization, and also for total volume or total amount of different exercises. But there are certain considerations also, particularly when we have athletes who get dysregulated or anxious or will get off task during transition. We probably want to make sure they are in one place doing one or two exercises and then moving on to the next. It was an awesome question. If you have a question about autism fitness programming or your programs in particular, then definitely leave it in the comments below. I'm happy to answer these and get the methodology out there. And if you are ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, head on over to autismfitness.com. Here's how it works. You register, you start your self-paced coursework online, and then you meet me or one of our master level pros for your virtual or in-person practical. If you want to know more about that, you can email me directly, info@autismfitness.com. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen with another Tuesday training. Thank you very much for watching. Please do not click off until you like and subscribe and even share this. And I will be back next week with another edition of Tuesday Training.